Hi again. In this video, we will talk a little bit about arrows and their use in Kazakh horsebow archery. So, Kazakhs, obviously, if they had bows, they had arrows, and they produced them locally as well as imported them. And I must say that in certain areas of Kazakhstan, finding wood for arrows was very challenging task because Kazakhstan is basically plains, flatlands, trees don't grow everywhere, so they had to make a lot of effort to find right trees. And I know of three types of arrow shafts, materials used for arrow shafts. One is just like everywhere else, using lumber, cut lumber. They also used tree branches, like just thin straight tree branches. And sometimes even out of desperation and lack of wood, they even used reed for that. And obviously, reed is a terrible material for arrows. It's hollow, it's brittle, and it's just a waste of fletching and arrowhead. But because good wood for arrows was so hard to come by, they had to sometimes succumb to such desperate solutions. Anyways, we have here in this chapter a lot of terminology, traditional Kazakh terminology, but we're not going to cover that here, obviously. We talk about a little bit about construction of arrowheads. Even though Kazakhs knew both socket and stem type of arrowhead connections, they mostly used stem type. And I assume personally that it was because they're easier to produce in a nomadic lifestyle environment, because let's not forget, nomads made pretty much everything on the move, and the nomadic smiths, they carried their equipment with them, and they did it inside of their yurts. They didn't have these like in Central Asian cities or Chinese cities, where they had entire sections of the city devoted to all kind of artisans and craftsmen and weaponsmiths and etc. The nomadic smith would carry his shop with him and travel with his tribe just like everybody else. So obviously he didn't have the luxury, or he just consciously simplified the design to meet his simpler arrangement and technical abilities. So the stem type was more oftenly used because it's much easier to produce than the socket type, although both were known well to the Kazakhs. And another another reason maybe why the stem type was used is because very often you read that in combat arrows they specifically used stem type arrowheads, because if they get stuck in the body, in the prey's body or in the enemy's body, when you pull in an arrow, the shaft or the arrowhead stays inside of a flesh, but you can pull out the shaft with fletching and reuse it, because you just insert the similar stem shaped arrowhead, and you're good to go. You still have your arrow. While if it was socket type, maybe it would be harder to pull or something. And sometimes they also added a little bit of little bulb right where the stem turns into an arrowhead. So it kind of prevents arrowhead, the metal part, the arrow tips, from sinking into the shaft's hole upon the impact. So that was another feature. Interestingly enough, the Kazakhs still used bone and even uh, wooden arrows uh, even in 18th, 19th century, because again, producing metal arrowheads in large amounts was difficult, so they kind of used whatever they could get their hands on. Obviously, it was probably not for combat use, but for hunting, maybe small game, and I think it would perform just fine. Also, there were the uh, the the uh, dull arrowheads, the ones that designed to inflict blunt trauma and not damage the skin, used for hunting birds and large, small game with price with worthy fur that they wanted to keep intact. Um, so that kind of covers the arrowheads. Now, as far as for fletching, the Kazakhs preferred to use fletching of birds of prey, and the obvious reason for that is that being nomadic, they didn't have geese, they didn't have chicken, they didn't have farms. They only had their animals or livestock suited for nomadic lifestyle, which is moving. So they had sheep, they had horses, they had camels, a little bit of cows, but not chicken and not geese. So the only suitable arrows that they could get would be of wild birds, and of the wild birds, they would obviously prefer large birds of large feathers of birds of prey. Also, it is said that because the tail feathers of birds of prey are symmetric, they're much more suitable for fletching, and that's another reason why they prefer to use it. The Kazakhs used same pretty much fletching configurations as everybody else. It was 3 feather, sometimes 2 feather, sometimes 4 feather, or kind of like in Manchu archery, 3 feather, but not equally spaced around the diameter of a shaft, but 2 feather being like this, and then 1, kind of sticking out like this. So everything's pretty standard. Shafts, they were barreled, they were straight types, made of available material, like I said. Arrowheads were arm piercing, flesh cutting, regular, universal type, and etc. The uses of arrows were, again, just like everybody else, for hunting and for combat archery. An interesting type of arrow with very long fletching that I saw on the display in the museum and in some of the books. It had very long fletching, kind of like 1/3 of an arrow. So I made a replica of it, I shot it, and it performs kind of like flu arrow, where the fletching is designed to kind of slow an arrow and stabilize the flight. And it is said that they use it for like shooting flying birds because it supposedly allows for better aim or something. I don't know. I'm not a hunter, so I have to kind of sell it for what I bought it. But it's interesting that the Kazakhs had arrows that performed like flu arrows, and I assumed that they were used for hunting as well. Combat arrows, again, they were armor piercing, cutting arrows, barbed arrows. You know, the standard options. Interestingly enough, I found information about ritual arrows. Apparently, there is a long, very ancient, probably millennia old tradition of using arrows for various rituals. For example, for fortune telling, or the shamans would use them. Actually, a lot of shaman attributes, such as their clothing, their drums, and etc., often have depictions or symbols of bow and arrow. And the famous golden man, the symbol of Kazakhstan, the Saka prince or princess that was found in Issyk city, about 40 kilometers away from where I live. He was wearing two of arrows, ritual arrows, on his headwear, obviously for some sacred reasons, some religious reasons. We don't know, but uh, this is very significant that arrows were so important in a spiritual, religious, and ritual aspects of life of Kazakhs. And that's it for the arrows. I'm finishing this section, and then we will talk about the use of Kazakh horsebow in the next video. Thank you.